welcome into a special episode of the Irish NFL show. Alongside Colin Cronin, we have a very special guest on the show this week. This man needs no introduction. We see him daily, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. on Sky Sports Action PFT Live with Chris Sims. And we also see him into the early hours of Monday morning during the season on NBC Sunday Night Football. It's great to have you on, Mike. Welcome to the Irish NFL show.
It's great to be with you guys, and it has meant a lot to us to be on Sky the past 4 or 5 years. I've lost count, frankly, but there is such a passionate base of support for the NFL in Ireland, throughout Europe, really. And I think part of it is the people who are very intense fans don't get the kind of coverage, don't get the kind of content they want. So what they have, they appreciate a lot more than the folks here in the States where it's everywhere you look. You can't get away from it.
Mike, we've been very fortunate, covering the game here in Ireland. We've been to the past 2 Super Bowls. We come over often to games during the regular season. We covered a game in London and in Munich this year. Obviously, 2 games this coming season. When you've covered the league for such a long time, when you reflect on the enormity of how much the game has grown throughout the course of the years and how the NFL have kind of tapped into this opportunity, you see, as you said, the coverage on Sky. Does it take you back, having covered the league for so long?
Well, and it takes me even back farther than that. The league has grown significantly in the past 20 years, but it was already the king of the jungle in the United States. The experiment to not necessarily take over the world, but I think it's a 100-year plan to try to at least become number 2 clearly and firmly to your football, soccer. But when I was a kid growing up in the 70s and I was a baseball fan and a football fan, I gravitated eventually more toward football, and football was kind of the underdog. They called baseball America's pastime, and baseball was the thing, and everybody was into baseball, and football was second tier. And at some point in the 80s, football passed baseball and never looked back. So I'm sure they would love to do that to soccer at some point, years and years and years from now. But they're making the commitment to put 4 games minimum in Europe every year, and they keep talking about putting teams there. I'll believe it when I see it, but the chatter is intensifying. When the conversation is, well, maybe we'll have 1, oh, okay, fine. When the conversation is maybe we'll have a whole division, then you start taking it more seriously.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see what happens there. Mike, one of the biggest story of the off season has been the Lamar Jackson story. And I know you've covered it. I know I wrote a really interesting piece that you wrote at the end of March where, you were kind of wondering out loud. It wasn't based on any prediction. It wasn't based on a report, but you wondered, what was the end game on this? And even since then, we've seen further developments. Lamar coming out and saying he asked to be traded. Today, the fact that the Ravens didn't want to take questions, which you rightly pointed out, only leads to more questions. Now that we're, I suppose, in the middle of April, are we any closer to an end game in this? Is it going to be after the draft, or could we really see Lamar sit out next year?
Well, there are still steps left to get to the point where he doesn't play in 2023, but there aren't that many. Step 1, does anything happen between now and the draft? I doubt that it does. I think after the draft, depending upon who does and doesn't get quarterbacks, there may be teams that pivot to Lamar Jackson if the Colts don't get the quarterback they want at number 4, because we assume, and I think accurately, it's going to be quarterback at 1, quarterback at 2. If the Cardinals trade out of that spot at 3 quarterbacks are going to be gone. And if those are the top 3 quarterbacks on the board for the Colts and they aren't comfortable taking their 4th guy with that pick, then they may not come out of the draft with a quarterback and they could go to Lamar Jackson. There could be other teams that we don't know about, we aren't thinking about, that are secretly coveting the possibility of moving up to number 3 and getting Anthony Richardson, who I presume would be the quarterback that would be targeted there. And if they don't make that happen, then maybe there's a market for Lamar Jackson. But I still don't think there will be, given the significant draft pick compensation that would need to be surrendered and that big contract he wants. So I think it's going to come down to 2 things. 1, can the Ravens and Lamar Jackson work out a long-term deal before the deadline of July 17? That is when any franchise tag player has to sign a long-term deal. After that, you can only sign a 1-year deal. And then after July 17, will he play for $32.4 million? I wouldn't if I were him. So then the question is, how much more do the Ravens have to offer him to get him to show up. And I don't think it's that crazy to say maybe he won't say yes to any of the offers they make. He's yet to say yes at any point the last 2 years. Why do we think he's going to suddenly say yes? He's going to have a dramatic change in his mindset. And that's not impossible, but it hasn't happened in 2 years. And we're not very far away from that, putting him on course to not playing at all in 2023. Then we do it again next year. Well, how different is it going to be next year? Why do we think it is going to be different? Until he's willing to say yes to the best offer that someone makes him, he's not going to be playing. And it's up to him at some point to recognize this is the best it's going to get, and you just have to accept it if you want to continue your career.
Mike, a significant amount of Patriots fans this side of the world, and over the past couple of months, there's been a sense of uneasiness about how things are kind of progressing there. You know, we saw some unusual things, not Belichick like last season with 2 offensive coordinators. Mac Jones starts, he's taken out of a game. You know, Bailey Zappi plays, and then obviously you've had this piece this week around potentially a scenario where teams are considering potentially trading for him, and the Patriots are open to potentially shopping him. I mean, is there a relationship situation there between Belichick and Mac Jones, or do you just think they're not convinced by him as quarterback?
I think it is a dysfunctional and potentially toxic relationship that goes back to what happened after his rookie season. He goes from Josh McDaniels, one of the best offensive minds in the game, who becomes the head coach of the Raiders, and they opt for a Frankenstein monster approach with a pair of guys who aren't offensive minds. Longtime defensive coordinator Matt Patricia and failed head coach becomes the de facto offensive coordinator and offensive line coach. And Joe Judge, longtime special teams coordinator and failed former head coach, becomes the quarterback's coach. I know that there were people in the organization when Joe Judge came back just assumed he'd be involved in special teams. Like, what? Wait a minute. He's quarterback's coach? So Mac Jones is the one whose career gets tied to a couple of coaches who simply don't have the qualifications to get the most out of his abilities. And there was frustration tied to that. And then you throw in the angle of the injury that he suffered against the Ravens fairly early in the season, the Bailey Zappi, Mac Jones back and forth, the things that Bill Belichick has said since the season ended. He was asked right after the season ended, is Mac Jones your starter for 2023? And his answer was, he's proven he can play in this league. Then last week, he was asked about the potential for a competition between Bailey Zappi and Mac Jones, and he said both guys will have a chance to play. So I think there is a relationship issue there. There's frustration because Mac Jones hasn't been like other Patriots who just keep their mouths shut. He's expressed discontent privately. And this is something Chris Sims said earlier this week on PFT Live, contacted the University of Alabama, talked to some of the people he knows there, presumably Bill O'Brien, who's now back as offensive coordinator, to just try to salvage things last year. It was a mess last year, and I think the fumes of that are going to linger into 2023.
Mike, one of the things you talked about earlier in the offseason was some of the chatter that existed around the 49ers and Kirk Cousins. And then obviously they bring Sam Darnold in. Now this week, there's some chatter around Aaron Rodgers and the 49ers. And I suppose that's because the deal with the Jets hasn't got done. In terms of the 49ers, they obviously they have the Trey Lance, who they traded up for. They have Brock Purdy and they have Sam Darnold. Are they not happy with their quarterback situation in the Bay?
Well, if Brock Purdy hadn't gotten injured, I think they'd be thrilled. I think he'd be entrenched as the number one guy. They don't know what they have in Trey Lance. He can't stay healthy. And with Sam Darnold, that's a guy that Kyle Shanahan has always liked, but who knows what they're getting from him either. And they have him on a 1-year, $4.5 million contract, which isn't by any stretch significant quarterback money. So they have some flexibility to spend on a starter if they choose to do so. I continue to keep my eye on Tom Brady. I think any talk about Kirk Cousins was in the past. My understanding is at the scouting combine, there was a rumor making the rounds among football people that Cousins to San Francisco could happen, and maybe it would happen next year when he becomes a free agent after his contract expires in Minnesota. With Aaron Rodgers, I think that's just leverage on the Packers' part to try to get the Jets to finalize this deal sooner than later. And I think that deal does get finalized, possibly when the second-round pick the Jets will be sending to the Packers is on the clock on Friday, April 28th. But to me, if they get to a point where July, August, they're not thrilled with where Brock Purdy is, they're not ready to trust Trey Lance, they aren't willing to hand the offense over to Sam Darnold, and if Tom Brady gets to the point where he feels differently about being retired, he says for now that he's done. Well, he's discovered the ultimate safe harbor for changing your mind. All he has to say is, I believed it when I said it. And when he realizes that the NFL train is going to leave the station without him this year, and he's been part of the NFL since 2000, and he will learn, whatever his last year is, he will learn it will move on without him. It will move on as if he never even existed. And that is a tough pill to swallow, especially if you think you can still play. If you've played as long as you have, more than half of his life in the NFL, and if you believe you can still play, it is difficult to stand there and just watch that train chug away. And we don't know how he's going to feel. And I would submit to you, he doesn't know how he's going to feel until he's standing on the platform and the train is beginning to roll away.
Mike, there's a general consensus that if it wasn't for the unsettled nature of the Washington Commanders in terms of the ownership, Coach Rivera may have lost his job over the past couple of years because of the unsuccessful seasons. May 22nd, there seems to be a date that's kind of earmarked now as a potential date in which to find an agreement in terms of to take a new owner coming in, or certainly agreeing a deal. Like, does that need to be ratified at the league meetings, the next one? And how does that align with the timings? Will this be done this side of a new season?
I think it will be. Now, if they have a bidder selected and the finance committee, which does the preliminary review of the numbers and make sure everything is fine, if they're on board with it, then it's a matter of saying to the owners at the upcoming meeting, here we are, do you approve? And it takes 24 yes votes. And frankly, I think at this point, anybody that has enough money to satisfy the purchase price would get approved. Anybody would be better at this point as a partner for the owners than Dan Snyder. So I think that that's where it's moving. The word in the building as of a few weeks ago was that a sale is imminent, and there's been nothing to push back against that. And I really do believe that Amazon founder Jeff Bezos now has to make a decision as to what he's going to do. It's been set up perfectly, because if he had been front and center interested from the get-go, no one else would have made a bid. So he stayed in the background. There have been reports all over the place as to whether or not Snyder would even sell to him, because Bezos owns the Washington Post. It's said bad things about Dan Snyder. He's mad about that, etc. But now that they have two bids at $6 billion, the floor is set. Bezos swoops in, buys the team, and that's that, if he wants to do it. But he clearly can afford it. He's worth $120 billion. Far and away, he would be the richest owner in the NFL. He could buy that team. He could buy any team. He could buy multiple teams if they would let him. He could probably buy all the teams if he really wanted to. So I think that's what we wait and see. It's going to happen, I believe. The question at this point is, who is it going to be sold to? And I would rank it as 1, Bezos if he wants it, 2, Josh Harris, and 3, the Canadian billionaire Steve Apostolopoulos. I think he was involved just to push Josh Harris to $6 billion.
Mike, we always enjoy when you have Peter King on the show. He's been a good friend to us here at the Irish NFL Show. He's been on with us a few times. And you did a great segment last week looking, I suppose, at particularly around the flexing of the schedule and flexing into the Thursday nights. Now, for people on this side of the Atlantic, I can tell you that is a nightmare scenario, because you're trying to plan trips. And I know myself from going over to see games, you plan them months and months in advance, and then this could be taken away from you. Peter made his I suppose, feelings very clear in Football Morning in America this week. In terms of, do you think that the league were surprised by the backlash it received, or is it going to be, that they put it out there, they get the backlash this year, and then we will see this happen potentially next year?
I initially thought that the possibility of the Thursday night flex, was leaked as a trial balloon, as just let's make sure everybody knows this is coming. I now think that it was leaked by somebody who opposes it, because I believe that if it hadn't been leaked, it would have been rammed through and the commissioner would have gotten what he wanted. This falls into the category of something the commissioner really wants. And as Peter said last Friday, there are owners who are in favor of it simply because the commissioner really wants it. And the commissioner has the power, even though he works for the owners. Individually, there are owners who will cower and give the commissioner what he wants. Now, there are 10 who have yet to say yes. All it takes is 2, and 2 of the 8 are opposed, and there are 2 abstentions. So it shouldn't be that hard for him to twist arms to get this by May. The question is, will the 10 band together and try to get others to join them on the no side. When John Mara, the co-owner of the Giants, comes out and says it's abusive to fans, and it is, to move a game 3 days in each direction, and every game in December is at risk. Every Sunday game is at risk of being moved to Thursday night. Hey, I got tickets to a great game. Oh, this is a great game. Oh boy, I hope it's not too great of a game. They may take it to Thursday night. I'm astounded that they would put that on the radar screen for fans to worry about, and that they would do it to the fans who pay. Never mind the fact that I don't think it makes sense to have 2 short week games Sunday to Thursday, but they've already passed that, where teams can be expected to play up to 2 short week Sunday, Thursday games. They believe it's not a health and safety issue because the injury rate's no different on normal rest and short rest. I don't think that's enough information to go on. I think there are other factors to be considered, but I think this is all about propping up the streaming platforms because they know where the world is moving. And at some point, the networks fade out, the streamers move in, and they need to maximize the audience that congregates for a live game on a streamer. And they're finding out it's easier to get a big audience on an over-the-air network TV broadcast than it is to get people to dial up Amazon Prime or wherever else they may be looking.
Mike, just turning your attentions to the draft, and obviously the first pick, the Panthers have made this big trade with the Bears, and they've moved up to 1. And over the course of the last, say, 2 weeks, it looks like it's CJ Stroud. And then over the past couple of days, there's rumblings that it's kind of a mixed match within the building of some like Bryce Young, some are very keen on CJ Stroud. Where do you sit on this? Do you think it's all smokes and daggers and they are locked in on CJ Stroud, or do you see a surprise in the coming weeks?
There is no reason for them to be coy about it unless they're contemplating a flip-flop with the Texans to ensure that the Texans get whoever they want. My concern continues to be, and this is something Peter and I have argued about, the owner ultimately has the final say. And I agree with Peter's position that the owner won't say, thou shalt draft the guy I want. But I also would say that the owner shouldn't have to articulate it. If you are smart and sensitive to the likes and dislikes of the owner, you know what the owner wants without the owner saying, this is what I want. And if there is a split in the building, then whichever side David Tepper, the owner of the team, is on, is the side that's most likely to win. Because the people on the other side would rather not draw the line in the sand and be wrong. Because if you're wrong, you end up out of a job. If David Tepper abandons his preference for one over the other and they go the other way, and that guy ends up stinking and the other guy ends up great, David Tepper is going to say, I told you so, and see you later. So that's what I think is the great unknown. What does David Tepper want? Because at the end of the day, unless somebody talks him out of it, who is willing to put their job on the line to do so, whatever he wants is what they're going to get.
Mike, my wife is originally from Minneapolis before finding her way over to this little green island. You're a well-known Vikings fan. Are they ever escaping purple purgatory?
Probably not in my lifetime. I'm used to it. Really, for nearly 50 years since the last time they went to the Super Bowl. They're 0-6, I believe, in NFC Championship games, and it's a very spotty, 1 year they're good, 1 year they're not, get to the playoffs and lose, get to the playoffs and win every once in a while. I think that they need to move on from Kirk Cousins at some point to get to where they want to be. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the GM of the team, basically said that last July. We don't have Josh Allen. We don't have Patrick Mahomes. And you have to have one of the truly great quarterbacks to be a consistent high-end contender. The question is, how do you get one? Because there aren't many. In my estimation, there are 6 right now. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Trevor Lawrence. Not necessarily in that order, although I would put Patrick Mahomes at number 1, regardless of the other 5. That leaves 26 teams that don't have franchise quarterbacks. So if you don't have one, you're trying to get one. If you truly want to try to win Super Bowls. Now, every team says we're trying to win the Super Bowl every year because they have to say that. You can't say that to your fans and then expect them to pay the season ticket invoice and be as emotionally invested as you want them to be if you're like, well, you know what, we'll just be happy if we get to the playoffs this year. But the teams with franchise quarterbacks are the ones best suited to truly contend. That's the key. And I think the Vikings are contemplating life after Kirk Cousins. Under contract 1 more year, but you better have a better alternative. And I think that's been the problem as teams, or as fans, have clamored in recent years, get rid of Kirk, get rid of Kirk. Okay, fine. You get rid of him. Who's your quarterback? Who's your next guy? So they need to have a good plan in getting the guy that's going to take them to where they want to be. And I don't know that it's going to happen.
Mike, every year with the draft, there's risers and fallers, and Jalen Carter, for large parts of of the college season, looked like he was a standout number 1 or number 2 pick, depending on which team, if it was the Bears going defense at the time. You wrote a very good article recently how this might actually benefit him in terms of the fact that he's dropping down the board. I know Drew Rosenhaus this week has said, if you're not in the top 10, don't come and have a conversation, because he's not going to meet you, because he has a commitment that he will go in the top 10. Is he still going to be the talent that everybody expects? This off field issue, and obviously the weight issue at the pro day, seems to have kind of caught up with him.
The way a general manager explained it to me a couple of weeks ago, and it makes a lot of sense. If you use a top 10 pick on Jalen Carter, it validates the behaviors that give the teams concerns. And the message to him is, you don't have to change anything. And if that happens and he doesn't work out, it's lose-lose for everybody. So there could be some value in sliding out of the top 10 and getting a chip on your shoulder. We've seen guys over the years, like a Randy Moss in 98. Michael Thomas is an example that I always point to. A guy who didn't get taken in round 1. Now, of course, he's had injury issues the past few years, but he had one of the great receiving seasons of all time in 2019. And he's always motivated by the fact that he wasn't a first-round pick. Whatever it is that wakes you up and gets you to commit to getting the most out of your ability, that's the key. And that may be what Jalen Carter needs. Unless Drew Rosenhaus has gotten an assurance that he will be a top 10 pick, then it's not going to be an issue. He's a top 10 pick, and he has to find that motivation to get past the issues that have caused teams to wonder. But, for me, you got the off-field incident, which is very troubling and horrifying. And then you've got the fact that he had a bad pro day workout. To me, as I've said time and again, that's like failing an open book take-home exam. Your pro day workout should never be bad. Rarely does someone have a bad pro day workout. And it's possible he was carrying around a lot of stress from the off-field incident. It's possible the best move would have been to cancel it, postpone it, do it later. But the teams are doing their homework on Jalen Carter, and they're taking a bold move here by saying no one out of the top 10 need bother to even ask to sit down with him. We'll see if it works out.
Mike, obviously April 27th is a big date for NFL fans, but we should probably circle the 25th as well, because you have a new book coming out, and your last book, Playmakers, How the NFL Works and Doesn't, was absolutely outstanding. So looking forward to the new book. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about it?
Yeah, and here's what happened. The pandemic changed everyone's life for, good in some situations. Permanent adjustments to the way that we interact, permanent adjustments to the way that we work, and had a lot of free time, had a lot of time on my hands, had a lot of time sitting around. And, I've dabbled with some fiction in the past, and I had an idea, and I pulled the thread a little bit, and I sat down on a weeknight in June when things were slow, and I started going, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of fun. I'll do it tomorrow night. That's kind of fun. I'll do it tomorrow night. And 3 months later, or less, actually, I had a first draft of a book called Father of Mine that I had been working on to revise and improve. And it's a mob novel set in the small town in West Virginia where I grew up, about 60 miles southwest of Pittsburgh. The mob was prevalent in that town. My dad was a bookie who was tied to the mob that ran the town. So I knew a thing or two just by being around and seeing and listening. Now, I was a little kid, and it's not like I was entrusted any secrets that will get me whacked. At least I hope not. I think mostly everybody who was involved in that is dead now. But the story is completely fictional. There's no, for the most part, there's no characters that should be recognizable if anyone knows about the mob in Wheeling, although one in particular who I know is dead. I think anyone who knows about the Wheeling mob will say that's him. But I try to come up with a story that will be interesting and compelling from a different kind of an angle. Not New York, not Chicago, not big city mob, but small-time mob, and some of the bumbling hoodlums that make up the mob as they do things that actually were done by this group in Wheeling. I did some research as I was writing the book, and it's like, wow, if I'd have known about some of these things, I never would have gone close to some of these people. So it comes out April 25, $4.99 ebook. Paperback option is going to be available as well, but I've priced it low. I just, you're at the point where when you do this, you just want people to read it and enjoy it, and I hope people will.
Well, we know you're a talented broadcaster. We know you're a talented writer. We look forward to seeing the fictionalized piece. And we want to thank you for taking the time to chat to us here on the Irish NFL Show, and wish you continued success in your career.
Thank you guys so much. It's great to finally talk to you.